Welcome to A State of Mind. This is Julian Royce.
It gives you a taste of community connection contact that feels good enough to keep going and also doesn't hit the full button maybe.
Yeah.
Which is why we might feel the compulsive energy of like wanting more, because it doesn't actually hit the full button. To me, I hope as a culture, as we're exploring our relationships to technology, that we don't stop at the surface of regulating technology, that we actually deepen the question of like, what is it about us that's making this so challenging and difficult, and what are we ultimately wanting? What are we yearning for as humans? I think all those questions feel so valuable to me, and I hope we do the work.
I'll just heard a clip from today's conversation, just part 2 of my talk with Craig Salerno. Craig is a psychotherapist based here in Boulder, Colorado, and you can hear more of an intro for him in part 1, which was the previous episode on this podcast, entitled Psychedelic Therapy and Addictions. Here's the second part of our conversation. We focus on social media and cell phone, specifically from the point of view of addiction. It's a really fascinating and I think timely conversation. Really appreciated Craig's point of view. Clearly, these are incredibly addictive devices and platforms. And as I say in our conversation, the cell phone, social media apps, the websites themselves, they're all designed from the ground up to be as addictive as possible. Our conversation is in part a response to the documentary film, A Social Dilemma. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. The scope of this issue is massive, it's huge. In fact, as we all know, it's not one single issue. It's a whole cluster of many issues raised by these new technologies. It's impacting everything from our politics to our mental health. In fact, scientists have even shown that the shape of our skulls has changed as a result of constantly looking down at the phone all the time, which I think is hilarious. It's like the way gravity is pulling on us as we look down at them. You know, we're only beginning to understand these complex issues, especially around social media. I think the ways it has changed our minds, again, is just huge, and I think it's really changed the ways in which we experience and understand what is real. And that's something I hope to explore in a future episode. If you go back and listen to my conversation with Daniel Ingram, author of A Hardcore Dharma, he talks about in his own personal experience as an emergency medical doctor, he saw the number of emergency room visits, hospitalizations for mental and behavioral health more than double when cell phones and smartphones became ubiquitous, specifically among teenagers. So I thought that was really interesting to hear, and it's just one person's experience in their work, but it shows some of the massive impact that these things have had. And, if we jump to the political realm, it's difficult to imagine a President Trump without his use of Twitter, right? He may never have been elected without some of this stuff. So I should note here, this conversation was recorded at the end of December 2020. We don't really get into politics too much. Craig's main point in looking at this issue is to challenge us to look within. He thought The Social Dilemma as a film did a great job of looking at the problems in these companies and the ways these things are designed. But he does, and I thought this was so brilliant and fascinating, he really is pointing us to do the inner work and to look within ourselves to see what in us is getting hooked. And this is really actually an ancient point, that if we have addictive behaviors, unhealthy behaviors, different issues like this, we can look to the external world and try to change that, or we can look more inward and see if we can get more to the root of the problem. And Craig is actually writing an article about this, that whatever addiction or unhealthy behaviors we may have, we can actually look within and do the inner work to free these addictions at the root. And I think the answer here is that we really need to honor both. It's important to do the work to improve our society, to make our world more equal, more prosperous for everyone. And it's also really important to, again, do this inner work, to look within, to see that if we're caught in addictive patterns and behaviors, there's something in us that is getting hooked. And this is a core teaching of so many of the world's spiritual traditions. I think that either an internal or an external focus on dealing with problems can be taken to unhealthy extremes. So again, I think it's important to work on both approaches, especially if we're talking more generally about society. And it makes me think of my time living in India and Nepal. It's a time in my life that I remember fondly. And to speak in generalities, and I know that to any generality there's an exception, But I think it would be very fair to say that the external material conditions here in the United States, for example, are much better than that in India. In India, at least where I lived, in northeastern India, not only is there tremendous poverty, pollution, disease, lack of sanitation, there's also, like, everything takes so much longer. Life is so much more unpredictable. I remember being there when I first got there, going to mail some postcards and thinking, maybe this will take half an hour, maybe 45 minutes. The post office was just down the street. It ended up taking me like 3 or 4 hours to mail these postcards. It was like, like most of my day, like half my day. I just could not imagine the chaos of this Indian postal office. It's just hard to describe, like all the people coming and going, the packages, the animals getting out, the lines, it was just unbelievable to me. And at the same time, so many of the people I met there had a kind of peace of mind, even contentment. I honestly couldn't say that people in America, generally speaking, are happier than people in India. Probably not. And that's despite all of our efficiency, all of our wealth, all of our cleanliness. Most of us don't even seem to be able to appreciate those things most of the time. Maybe we're too busy looking at our phones all the time. Well, without further ado, I bring you Craig Salerno, Part 2. Mentioning that the phone can be an addiction, and that's something we talked about before this.
I think it's this entry point for people who are identify as non-addicted to understand in some way what addiction feels like. Which to me, I'm like one of the big, challenging components is like setting goals and expectations for oneself, and like this desire to get out of a compulsive pattern, and then just a consistent inability to get out of it. And how many people that I've talked to that want to have a different relationship to their technology, to their email, to their phone, to their Instagram, and just feel like they're locked in something that is way bigger than them and that they feel powerless to. And I'm like, if you talk to anyone who's gone through substance addiction, they'll have a lot to tell you about that process and how to work through that process. So I have a big thing around, we often stigmatize and ostracize drug and alcohol addicts, but they're the wisdom holders right now, in my perspective, of helping us combat our challenges with technology and addiction. Yeah. Because there's people that have done this with way more powerful forms of reinforcement. Heroin, methamphetamine. Seriously, benzos. They've worked with things way more potent than cell phones, and they've found ways to maneuver through it. So to me, I'm like, instead of ostracizing them, I think we should bring them in as leaders and say, like, help us understand addiction. Yeah.
I love that. That's a great message.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about it that way, but I think it's true. I think the cell phone addiction is insidious and huge and massive. And I notice it myself, obviously see it with other people, but I noticed it myself the other day. Like, I'm going to walk the dog, I get the dog leash, and I get my phone. I'm like, why? Like, it's so... We're even moving from one room to another room in my house, and there's some sense of like, oh, I gotta get my phone. Yeah. Or I'm gonna go cook some rice. Where's my phone? Like, what is going on?
I mean, the neat thing about you even know, you're already so far beyond, the fact that you notice, like, oh, why? That's the liberation is in that moment of noticing, like, why do I?
There's a little bit of choice there. And
it's the space, but I think, I'm like, so many people can probably relate to this. And I was talking about that notion of like phantom phone, where like
it's become a part of our body.
It's attached to us.
Phantom limb syndrome. It's the phantom phone syndrome.
It is energetically attached to us. And physiologically attached to us because it's delivering so many reinforcements. Yeah. And then I'm like, you're leaving something. It looks like a phone, but actually what it is like this big, powerful reinforcer, Yeah.
Well, I think it's literally an extension of our mind. Mm-hmm. And I think if you study, like, I don't know, what is it, Gregory Bateson or different people who define the mind, like Dan Siegal, like the mind is not our brain and it's not in our body. It exists in relationships. The emotions that your parents or partner have affect you. So there's this permeable quality of our mind extending beyond our body. If you read the news story, you feel an emotion. And so phones absolutely are an extension of our mind.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I first got an iPhone, it must have been like 8 years ago or something. And I remember having this weird kind of dream where I had it next to me in the bed, and it was new and it was interesting, and I felt the power of it, and I'd been kind of resisting getting a smartphone for a while. And there was this sense of it like tentacles, like an octopus, like coming out of it into my head as I was sleeping. And I remember thinking, like, should I put this in a different room? Like, is it giving off some kind of like, radiation or something?
But it was knowing that this thing is like, encapsulating a part of you.
Yeah. It became an extension of my mind so quickly, my calendar, my everything, so email, whatever. Yeah, it's interesting.
My room flooded in 2013. The first thing I grabbed was my laptop and my cell phone. And I'm like, interesting, all these other relics in my room. And, it's like, it just showed me in that moment too, like how important these objects are.
Right. They are, yeah.
But yeah, they definitely do have a tentacle quality. And again, understanding the addictive element of this, of like if you talk to someone in substance abuse recovery, they'll talk very similarly about how the drug overtakes, and you can feel it compressing and taking you over. And this notion of like, I'm losing my self-efficacy and autonomy and power in relationship to this thing that's way bigger than me. And to me, like, technology has that quality as well.
It's scary. It's scary to recognize the seriousness of that and the weight of it. And there's a sense of safety. Like if you have your phone, you feel safer.
Totally. And
there's a certain logic and even truth to that. And that's part of the addiction, I think. That's part of the... Like if someone is, if you're addicted to cigarettes, you need to have them with you wherever you go so you can have one when you want it. And if you don't feel safe.
Totally. It's like the body's giving you the cue that something's not okay.
Yeah, and it's in our body, and it's it's not actually logically, literally true, but it sure feels like it.
Yeah, which again, talk to someone day 2, day 3 into addiction recovery. My body's communicating that something is not okay, and that the only way to make this okay is to go get the drug.
Yeah.
It's just so it's so comparable. It's almost funny.
It is funny
that people still push away this notion of addiction and think that it's out there. I'm like, that's it.
Yeah, we're all addicted to our phones.
Oh my god. But again, so I'm like, here's where I got why I'd like to talk about this topic. The addicted to the phone thing, that's where I want to pull our awareness away from that. And this is like a response to the Social Dilemma documentary, which a lot of people are like, yes, these algorithms are taking advantage of us. We need to regulate Instagram and regulate social media because it's out there.
Yeah.
And to me, the real thing, the real dilemma is us and our psychology and our emotional impulse. And the whole reason we can be manipulated by an algorithm, or the whole reason we can get addicted to a cell phone, isn't because the cell phone's so good at being it's because we are wired in a certain way that makes us vulnerable. So the real dilemma to me is internal, and I think this is the real curious thing to think about, of like, if we shifted let's regulate the same way we regulate alcohol.
Tobacco.
It can be dangerous. It should have rules and regulations. Does that mean no one's going to get addicted to it? Look how many people are addicted to alcohol and nicotine and tobacco. Tobacco and nicotine kills 5 million people on the planet a year. It's unbelievable negative impact, and it's hyper-regulated.
Yeah, way more than COVID and everything.
So this notion of like regulating technology is going to solve the issue. I was like, no, actually, if you go internal, we can start working at solving the issue. And to me, I'm like, that's the bigger documentary I'm waiting, and maybe I'll be the one to make it. Maybe we can make it, is like the emotional dilemma of being a human.
Beautiful.
And why we're so easily manipulated. And it's us. It's our system. And
that we could do the work in ourselves. I love that. And here's the big both and. And we're in this weird capitalist system that preys on our addictive tendencies, right? We're up against $1 billion or what are they? Maybe $1 trillion. I don't know at this point. Corporations. Like think about the smartest, most intelligent people that go to Harvard and Yale and Stanford, and they graduate and they get a job with Google, and basically their job is to spend 50, 60 hours a week to make this thing more addictive for you.
Totally.
That's what we're up against, right?
Yeah. The same way an alcoholic is up against the endless marketing.
Yeah.
And the placement of liquor stores on every corner, which again will cue our body to pursue. It's the same tactics. Of like, I know you're vulnerable. I know your system is vulnerable, and we can actually place things around you that are going to instigate the impulse to pursue.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I agree. I'm like, we're working against a ravenous, capitalistic energy.
Yeah.
It still doesn't change where the work is to me. I think we need to acknowledge and respect that.
Yeah.
And if we talk to people that are doing addiction recovery, we talk to them of like, once you leave residential, which is a safe environment, the world's not made to help you recover. The world is made to help you to go back to your addictions.
Yeah, well, that's the truth.
You know, the liquor stores and the drug dealers are going to be seeking you out, and everyone has strategies to bring you back.
Unfortunately, a lot of pop culture too, right?
Yeah, oh my God. The music, I mean, look at
music
the music. Yeah, but again, the work is internal, and like, how do we combat
I love that. I
all
agree.
the fish hooks that are thrown together?
Right.
Yeah.
I think ultimately that's true, and we have potentially a tremendous amount of power within ourselves to overcome that. And it's kind of like making me think about like doing this internal work and doing the more social justice or activist work, or I don't really like those phrases, but looking at the society picture, the political picture, and I can't help but go to like our unsustainable capitalist system. Like, I think capitalism has its place and we can have elements of it, but to have corporations that are required to pursue endless infinite growth, to sell us more stuff all the time, to colonize our attention and our mind, we're not incentivizing a world of greater well-being and happiness. We're incentivizing a world of greater mental distress, addiction, consumption, and to what end? Right?
Totally. Yeah, I agree. And like, that is sacred work of like shifting the environment and the way businesses work and all that. I feel like is really powerful work. Yeah. I think where I get my focus on the internal is like being a psychotherapist. When someone sits with me, the notion of like how we can do that work to me feels ominous and huge.
So big.
The notion of doing the work internally of like, can we help you direct your attention in a way that's more skillful? Can we help you learn techniques for managing your impulses?
Right. Sense of choice and control. One little mental trick I've used with the phone, or with Facebook in particular, is I think to myself, every time I make a post on Facebook, I'm working for Mark Zuckerberg. And I think about his face, and I don't like him. And I'm like, I don't want to work for that guy for free.
Nice.
Like, that's what we're doing, right? We're working for him for free.
Yeah.
Because we're creating the content that's driving the business on his
such
website.
a good aversion. Yeah, you're like, I'm Mark Zuckerberg's bitch.
Yeah, it's funny. I had a friend, I was like, this is literally a week ago. He's like, I deleted Facebook and Twitter. It's too much distraction. I was like, wow, it's amazing. Congratulations. And then yesterday, I was like looking at my Facebook thing, and he liked one of my... He liked a picture of it. Yeah. Well, that didn't last long.
Yeah, but I would be so curious, like, to sit with a person like that. Like, so talk to me about what happened in your decision to go back. What was happening for you? What was coming up? You know, like, there's so much to learn about the re-pursuit. It's like working with relapse. I'm making everything comparable to addiction, because that's really what I want to focus on is this notion of, like, as you relapse into a pattern you want to break, what's happening? What's the precursor? What emotional subsets coming in before you actually re-download the app? Because, again, you can learn so much about your psychology in those moments.
The right before.
Yeah, and the question being, like, what else do you imagine could be available? Yeah. What is this functioning for you? So the fact that you redid the Facebook app, and it must be doing something for you. Let's really get curious around what that is. And can we supplement a little bit of what it's meeting with other stuff?
Right.
You know?
I imagine, I think that's a great point. I imagine that he didn't have a really clear intention or desire even to get rid of it for a certain period of time, maybe. I mean, it makes me think about the role of our want and intention and desire, and I guess that's kind of controversial in the addiction field, but how much does the individual genuinely wanting to stop the addiction, like, how does that play into it? Because if you don't see Facebook as a problem, you're never going to want to stop. Yeah, and maybe it's not a problem for you. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of power to that, and I've worked in court-mandated treatment, and there's actually this was maybe 5 years ago, so maybe research has changed. But as someone who comes to us and says, like, I'm getting sober because probation, I don't actually want to get sober, but I know it's a means to an end, versus someone who's like, I'm so done being an addict. There's no difference between who has a higher success rate.
Oh, that's amazing.
So, like, this notion of intention, it's a curious phenomenon. And how often I've seen...
hard to accept. Yeah.
The phenomenon I've seen of, like, people who come in and everyone's like, oh my God, this person's super stoked about getting sober, so excited, so enthusiastic, doing all the work. relapse is day 2 out of treatment. This person who comes in super fucking ambivalent, not really sure they want to do it, and now is 6 years sober. There's this notion, again, we've worked with this idea this whole podcast of like there's a lot of fucking variables. And intention, I think, is very helpful. A lot of people work with this idea of like when you really want it, you'll get it kind of deal. And like when you really put your intentions in, but I know a lot of people who put all their intentions in and still struggle.
It's amazing.
So like there's a lot happening in there. And I think we need to be humble to recognizing.
Yeah, it's a good reality check.
So
to
fucking nuanced.
see that. And see the reality of that. The limits of our willpower, our intention, our Yeah. What was I gonna say? Yeah, I think the to bring it back to the social media stuff, there is a sense of, on the one hand, like you can say that's not real life, but there's a sense in some ways that it's more real than real life. If I put something on Facebook consistently over the years, and there's some hundred or however many hundreds of people, and that's how they're keeping in touch with me. That's how they see what my quote unquote world or life is. It's like we make ourselves in these little mini celebrities in some way, and then it takes on this reality. Yeah, and so that's part of the addiction. That's part of why it's hard to give that up. And then the FOMO, like if I delete that, I'm not going to see what everyone else is doing. It's like this alternative reality or realities that we've created and then get invested and lost in. And
but see, I would get so curious. Like, I might miss out on what other people are doing if we can explore why that feels valuable or important to you. To see what other people are doing, you can imagine you would have a field day exploring what's underneath that. And eventually all the roots to me will come back to like us working with our emotional states. Our loneliness, our longing, our emptiness, our sense or lack of purpose. Right. If you really keep rolling, and this to me is like the importance of getting a therapist to help people do these inquiries. Yeah. You can find out so much about unmet needs and things that are and to me, this is just what you learn when you work with addiction is long. It always comes to core emotional processes that are catalyzing all of these. And that's actually what people are targeting. When you talk about companies, when you talk about the social dilemma and the algorithms, they're hitting much deeper emotional core needs. And if you have zero awareness of that, you are such an easy poach.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. My brother never got on Facebook, never did it from day one. And maybe that was a good choice. Like, so he doesn't know. It's just not part of his world.
Yeah, he never took the drug.
He never took the drug. But I think that part of the insidiousness of it is these things connect us and at the same time alienate us simultaneously. And that's part of the. So when I think about why do I go on Facebook and Instagram, it's like I want to feel connected. I want to be in touch. I want to know what people are up to. It's this. But it doesn't really get that sense of community and belonging that is kind of underlying that. I look deeper.
It gives you a taste of community, connection, contact that feels good enough to keep going, and also it doesn't hit the full button maybe. Yeah. Which is why we might feel the compulsive energy of like wanting more, because it doesn't actually hit the full button.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's such a wild thing to think about, just all of this. Yeah. And to me, I hope as a culture, as we're exploring our relationships to technology, and I think the social dilemma did an awesome job just opening this up, that we don't stop at the surface of regulating technology, that we actually deepen the question of like, what is it about us that's making this so challenging and difficult? And what are we ultimately wanting? What are we yearning for as humans? I think all those questions feel so valuable to me, and I hope we do the work to dig in there and find and feel into it. Yeah. Because there is a pervasive emptiness in our culture that I think is very apparent. And to me, I'm like, if we want to go there, I feel like we're ready to go there, to feel into that and to really look at what we're actually yearning for. Yeah, like look at that and make some changes. And I wonder if forming smaller but closer communities that actually meet in person, could be part of the solution. Well, staying in touch with the greater world and everything too, but that if you're part of a group that has, like I've heard that number 150 thrown out, like we evolved to live in tribes of about 100, 150 people, maybe 200. And that's the kind of amount of close connections we can like really sustainably have and feel good about. And beyond that, it's not. And so I wonder if there could be more of a movement to create close, smaller communities like that. Yeah, I'd be curious. Can always move to a small rural town. Get out to Missouri. But I think too, I'm like, there's so many different styles of people. Like, some people thrive and do super well in those large environments in cities. Some people don't.
Right.
And just recognizing you got to like kind of understand what you need and what feeds you.
Right.
And it reminds me too, same thing with like the relationship to technology and Instagram and Facebook. Some people can use in a healthy way. Some people are compulsive and need to like do the harm reduction model of like being setting rules and restrictions. And then some people should not have a relationship to social media. Like the addiction is so strong, it's so destructive, and it wounds people in such a pervasive way that sometimes you need to do the 12-step model, just cut it out. And to me, I'm like, you know, there's a whole scale of where people fit, and there's no one size fits all.
Yeah.
The same way with substances. Like you figure it out as you go, where you land in the scale. Some people will never touch it again. Some people will do a harm reduction approach, and some people just don't actually have a problem with it.
Right. Yeah, I think that's accurate. Yeah, some people definitely should probably just stop. I've heard of a number of people who, this is kind of weird, but some situation where like they're in a relationship with someone else, right? Like girlfriend, boyfriend, or whatever, dating, and then the ex-partner of their partner finds them through social media and in one case like harass them a lot, or another case is just like looking at all their videos obsessively and you can like see that they've looked at them.
Yeah.
So it's like all these interesting, because this ability to like search and find someone.
Yeah.
And that wasn't possible like 20 years ago. You just couldn't do that. You couldn't see what your ex-boyfriend's new girlfriend is doing yesterday in Hawaii or whatever it is.
Yeah. So you have so much information, it's almost like daunting. How much
it's not good, right?
Yeah, well,
at least in that way, it's not good.
It's wisdom and neurosis to it. I think the information is what we find so helpful, and then also the information can be very unhelpful. It's a lot of things I don't want to know about certain people that you can figure out with a Google, and you're like, oh, whoa, okay, yeah.
See, I think that's part of the conversation that we need to start thinking about is like, we're in this age of information. There's some information that we're better off not knowing, you know, and like to recognize that, and like I'm better off not eating a dozen donuts every day. I'm better off not spending my time searching up certain people, or whatever it is, you know.
Your ex-girlfriend's ex-boyfriend's ex-girlfriend, you don't need to know their life. Yeah. But that's, to me, I'm like, there's another notion around this social media technology thing around like just identity, and too, there's such a big shadow component of exploring like the identity component of this, and like you said, like we have this, I don't know the actual word you use. I said it was like almost like an avatar or a celebrity version of ourselves. And the fact that we can actually receive positive feedback and observation and how deeply we long to be seen. There's something that you feel as a therapist. It's just like the medicinal quality of being witnessed. So many of my clients will just like break down in tears upon first meeting just to be witnessed. That alone is such a powerful gift. Yeah. And then to think that this is getting tangled in this notion of like the likes and the views and the clicks and the likes.
Here's me walking my dog.
But again, like honoring and holding compassion of like, yes, of course it feels deeply medicinal. And also the shadow component being like when we get attached and stuck on that in an endless pursuit of like more witnessing, more like that more part is where I think a lot of the negative energy can draw us in. Yeah. And like how big, how much witnessing, you know. Can I be seen in this way? Can my avatar do this and present as this? Yeah, it can get dicey in there.
Totally. Well, that's a great point you just made, like tracing it back to that more core need and then like learning how that could actually be met, how that could actually feel right. Because for sure there's people with however many thousand followers who aren't having that need being met, right?
Totally, yeah. So. I think my dream of how people work with the social media impulses is like, the same way you talked about like walking to the other room and you notice you want to take your phone, like in that moment of like wanting to draw into social media to like stop, take a breath, develop some inquisitiveness around like what is actually coming up for me right now. Okay, I'm wanting to make contact, I'm wanting to feel some connection, and having like a buffet open in your mind or like what's available in that. Okay, like social media posting, I could look at videos, I could call my mom, you know, I could sit down and meditate and actually like hold my heart and bring that into myself. And like, what is going to serve me right now? What will feel good to me?
Beautiful.
In totality to my larger identity of how I like to be in the world. And like those contemplative moments, to me, it's like that's what, if you talk to someone in addiction recovery, they learn to do that in a very powerful way. Like, here's the buffet. Drug use is one version that works. It's really effective. And like, is there something else available to me that actually feels more aligned with how I want to show up? and then choosing that, and the integrity that builds when you do that.
Yeah.
And the actual identity that builds when you do that, and your trust in yourself. I'm like, that's what I want to help people cultivate. And when I work with people, I'm like, that notion of like, wow, I really live a life aligned to how I would like to be is the biggest high you're ever going to get.
Yeah.
In comparison to getting 2,000 likes or fucking high on heroin. Like, that is going to be the best high you ever got.
Yeah, that's well said. I think, I appreciate that. I mean, just getting in touch with that, slowing down, and I forgot what I was going to say.
That's it. Getting in touch and slowing down is the practice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to me, I'm like, the response to the social dilemma, the emotional dilemma, to me is that contemplative work of like, can you slow your system down? Can you be mindful of where your attention is going?
Yeah. Can
you pay attention? Can you start opening up in curiosity and inquisitive around what else is available? Can you notice the emotional experience underneath it? And can you work with it from this like observing, compassionate witness function? And to me, that's like the ultimate liberation for people.
Yeah.
And you can do that with fucking everything.
With everything.
Yeah.
It could be a natural process. Like,
yeah.
Eventually, I guess that could become more natural. It wouldn't take a lot of effort. Part of what I just thought of when you were sharing that is this sense of you said integrity, sense of self-worth, sense of, I'm not sure what word to put because I don't really like the word self-esteem, but like a positive feeling of who I am and what I'm doing. And addictions chip away at that. They take away at that. It's this weird paradox where you're addicted to whatever it is, alcohol or social media. So some part of you likes that. And so logically you would think, well, I can have what I want. But for some reason, the reality is this cycle of like more and more like self-loathing that can develop out of that addictive cycle. And it's kind of paradoxical. It kind of isn't logical. It doesn't really make sense, but I think it's like we're losing touch with that core sense of who we really are, who doesn't need that thing. And that feeds all these demons.
Agreed. Yeah. And in the moment, like you're saying, like it actually does feel good and meet a need.
Right.
Which is why we do it. And again, like having compassion for that. But on the back end, and there's just so many people that I work with that are like, yeah, like last night I sat and I fucking watched YouTube for an hour and it was great. I was distracting and then I just felt like gross after. And I'm like, that is what we're risking. You know, like getting that experience through like from not doing the practice in the beginning of like what is actually going to serve me and choosing what's easiest. We end up with like, you called it like self-loathing or these things of like, that didn't feel right. That's not how I want to spend my time. That's not where I want to put my attention. I don't want to go through my ex's Instagram for an hour. You know,
you feel worse.
Yeah. I'm like,
but that quality of losing control and being lost and like, you're like a half an hour goes by and you're like, where have I been?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that, to me, the thing about like at the end of the road of addiction is often suicide, right? Like that the self-loathing can develop to that point, and it's sad and it's hard to get out of that. And it's I'm just kind of reflecting on the illogicalness of it. You know, like we live in such a free, abundant, wealthy nation, and that addiction has become one of our big problems because we can go buy whatever I want almost, and not whatever I want, but you know what I mean. Yeah,
we have a drug dealer right next to us, in our phone. Yeah. Everything's immediately available.
Yeah,
and I love that you keep saying it's illogical because it's not our prefrontal cortex, which is like the logic.
Right,
our limbic brain.
It makes no sense if you think about it.
Yeah,
why would you do something that then later you're like hate yourself for doing that thing? There's no logic there.
I know. Yeah, just ask a heroin addict. Like you're gonna lose your children, your partner's breaking up with you, your family's kicking you out. And you really want to get high right now, and they're going to be like, yeah. And it's because another part of our brain has been hijacked.
Right.
That like the actual importance of all the other stuff doesn't even come into the equation. It's just like this limbic.
Taken over. Yeah. Yeah, in that moment. And then later there's like, it comes back online and you're like, why did I do that? And it doesn't make any sense. And all this shame and guilt. Yeah, it's amazing. I think
we have a lot to learn about this whole orb of addictive, energetic, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Whether it be with technology, substances in general, like we are just learning about this function of ourselves. And shout out to Buddhism. If you want to really start cracking in, they really point to the road. Yeah. Contemplative traditions, mindfulness, psychotherapy, and the more I think psychedelics, all these things merge. They all are working on that. thing.
Yeah. Well, just to kind of try to put it in a nutshell, I think in our day and age, I think mindfulness is a big part of the picture to help people. Like in the same way that we learn about nutrition and then we go to the grocery store and there's all this junk food and we have to make the choice to get healthy food, we're going to have to learn how to use mindfulness to like be aware of what we're putting our attention on, because the thing that's in our pocket, in our hand, our phone, is designed to all of a sudden an hour, 2 hours goes by, and then you're gonna have a sense of like, I don't have enough time in the day, and like, but you had 3 hours to be on Facebook, like, you know. So it's like we got to learn how to use our attention well, and it's a skill, it's a strength that in the past maybe wasn't as essential. But we're in this weird economy driven by our attention. These things are trying to take our attention from us. They're
like competing for our attention. I think that's the nice thing about how Social Dilemma painted that, was like they're all throwing the hooks out. Like we know there's a saturation of hooks coming at us.
It's good, and we know that,
and we know that we're vulnerable to it. So I think we got to work from that of like, the hooks are here, we're super vulnerable. How do we want to work with it? Regulate the hooks, yes. Work with our vulnerability, yes.
It's my hope is that people, like, you know, younger people that are getting a phone for the first time, or like, will have this information. They'll know that these hooks are out there. And I think part of the dilemma that we're in is we're like, oh, Facebook will connect us. It's a good thing. Oh, I have a smartphone. That's a good thing. And like, so we're kind of like people that started smoking cigarettes before they knew how terrible cigarettes are. Like, if you don't have that information, then you're just kind of going along, oh, this is a nice thing.
Just walk right into it. And
then you're in the middle of the swamp. You know, it's better to know that before you get in the swamp. Yeah.
Too late.
So too late.
We're in the swamp. I would like to entertain the idea of like just coming into the dynamic of being a human is coming into the swamp. You know what I mean?
That's
like
true.
Being birthed human means like there are certain subsets of difficulty and pain and challenge we're going to face. Which again, like Buddhism nails that stuff. Impermanence, egolessness, and like these notions of like basic core sufferings we're all going to experience. We're all vulnerable. We all got the same prescription.
We're all going to die. I think that's totally true, especially on the bigger level. I guess what I'm imagining with some of these products is like the same way if I want to buy cigarettes, there's a picture of a dead lung or whatever, and there's the big warning, this will kill you. Like, what if I clicked to download Facebook and this warning popped up and it had, you know, something along those lines, or like you're getting a phone and it had that warning of like the addictive potential. So maybe in the future things like that will be there.
I think we need the warning label on us.
You keep bringing it back to you.
We're holding both here, but I'm like, we're the ones.
That's definitely true. I think that's a great point.
And you're right. The reason I'm challenging this is because I feel right now our awareness, I think after the Social Dilemma comes out and all this kind of stuff, the awareness goes out.
We go external.
Of like, oh my God, what are the ways we're being manipulated? What are the da-da-da? And I'm like, to me, let's do the contemplative thing for a little bit. And if you're someone who's empowered to do the, like you're saying, the social justice work of altering and arranging and da-da-da-da-da, I'm like, all the power to you. I'm like 100% on board. My calling in this world is to help people really feel into their personal
I love
responsibility and vulnerability.
Well, I think like a podcast like this that shares this information can help do what you're talking about too, because like having some awareness, having some information that this is a danger and that there's another possibility is so helpful. Like, it's so important, you know. So having a roadmap, having some tools, having some options. You know, so but so like we need to do the inner work, but then we need to spread how to do that, and that it's even a possibility. But I love that you're saying that, and I think a lot of people aren't even thinking about it in that way. Maybe turning it off for a week. Like, what would it be like to go a week without your phone? Like, that would be an interesting experience.
Medicine fast with your phone. I think too. I'm like, turn off your fucking notifications.
Right.
Just like don't get the bings. Those are all that. It's like seeing the drug deal. It's like seeing the liquor store. I'm like, if someone had the ability to just remove those, all of a sudden the work becomes a little bit easier. I'm like, all the waste we're getting, like, you know, we can try to reduce those. I think we can be so conscious with how we try to limit the sensation and the hooking. Like, we actually have a lot of power in that regard too.
That's a great point. Yeah, we can control that stuff, and we can do a better job of that. I certainly could. That's
where intention comes in. Of like, you really gotta want to try and do this work.
You gotta want to do it and then try it out.
I hope people get motivated to do it. I hope I don't want to like get people enthusiastic about like, this is really deep, spiritual, powerful work to do on oneself.
Yeah.
And to me, it will cascade into so many bigger things. The way you're working with your phone, with technology, will integrate into the way you're working with your partner, the way you're working in a relationship, the way you're responding to your boss, the way you're working your job. If all of this is around like your alignment, your integrity, having control of your attention, minding emotional impulses and diving into what's underneath there and getting curious, if you just start developing that capacity with technology first, it naturally transitions to a lot of stuff. And suddenly like more integrity in your partnership, in your work, more purpose in your work. It can cascade in such a beautiful way.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe more mindfulness, more purpose, and taking that sense of power back to yourself. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We got to take the power back.
Yeah, make these things work for us rather than us working for them.
Mm-hmm. Who's working who?
I guess one last thought on it is just the way that we, expect instantaneous communication. That's actually something that we have some control over. Like if you get a text message and you immediately text back all the time, like that kind of becomes the norm. And if you don't do it, people might be like, what's wrong? What's going on? But you can kind of set up a parameter with yourself of like, I'm going to respond to this later. And that's an option. Or I'm going to turn my phone off now. Like that's an option. Some people have a really hard time just doing that for a few hours.
Mm-hmm. I have a hard time doing that.
Yeah.
I'm just like, what if I miss an important text? What if I miss an important email?
Yeah.
And I'm like, you need to talk to that self and be like, okay, like you're a little anxious. You're fearful that something big might happen. What's the ultimate consequence if that happens? Is it as drastic as it feels? No, not really. Okay, well then we can work with it.
Yeah.
Like it just takes a moment of inquiry and self-practice to, I think, address the bigger fears and the anxieties. But yeah, I like the idea too of like bringing your people on board with you and, letting people know like, hey, I really want to like start fasting off of my phone. I think people are talking about dopamine fasting a lot. Just this notion of like, I'm going to be a little bit less responsive or I'm not going to be as in contact. And, if you really need to get in touch with me, message me that, whatever. Like there's ways you can contextualize some of that.
Yeah, intentionally saying that, maybe creating a culture where that's a norm rather than the norm of instantaneous responding.
Yeah.
Because I get into that and it's such a time warp and it's such a pressure and a stress. And yeah. Well, thanks. It's been great having you on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me in. I hope I didn't ramble too much.
No, it's great. Do you want to mention your website or anything like that where people can find you?
Yeah, if people want to get in touch with me, CraigSalernoCounseling.com is the easiest direction. You can also email me at craigasalerno@gmail.com. And then I also work with the Boulder Wellness Ketamine Collective. So those of you that are interested in ketamine work and hearing a little bit about that, it's the BoulderKetamineCollective.com. BoulderKetamineCollective.com.
Nice.
Yeah, and if you just shoot a little Google search for Craig Salerno, you'll find some part of my contact information.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'll put all that on the show notes. So.
Perfect.
Great. Thanks for having you.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for listening. If you have found this podcast valuable, there are many ways in which you can support it. You can share it with friends and on your social media. You can leave us a review on your favorite podcast listening app. And you can visit our Patreon page, patreon.com/astateofmind. For show notes and more information unique to each episode, visit astateofmindplay.com. And to learn more about my work as a therapist, meditation teacher, and coach, visit julianocean.us. And please don't hesitate to send me a message or email and let me know what you think and contribute to our conversation. Thank you so much for your support. It is listeners like you that make all this so very much worthwhile.